Wine, cheese, a beautiful capital, the Riviera. There are many things you think of when France is mentioned. Armored fighting vehicles from the 1930s and 40s? Less so. We'll look at an example of why there may be a reason for that, with a low-tier rundown of the AMD.35 armored car. The French tech tree doesn't leap out at most people. Its earliest offerings a menagerie of lumpy grey vehicles. For those who have played War Thunder for even a little while, the French are known for two things: fast, small light tanks, and lumbering behemoth heavies. While neither of their reserve vehicles are these things exactly, I feel that they capture the essence of what's to come and serve as a small sample of the French War Thunder experience, with the AMD.35 representing the light vehicles. As an armored car, you would expect this thing to be pretty fast, and on paper that's the case with a 71 km/h top speed. As is common, in practice you'll never get going that fast, with 50 to 55 km max overland and a fighting speed somewhere closer to 35 or 40. Somewhat uniquely, it has a reverse gearbox, which means that instead of the usual slow crawl in reverse, this thing can move nearly as quickly backwards as it can forward. It has a crew of 4, which is unusual for such a small vehicle, and even more uncommon for the French in general. Moreover, they're pretty well spread out, as much as they can be, and you'll survive a few more hits than you'd initially expect. The gun traverse is a blazing 17.5 degrees a second, and the gun depression is an excellent -12. Having a quick turret is what separates the aggressive hunter-killer light tanks, like the BT-5, from the ambush sniper light tanks, like the Tetrarch. If you're ripping around the map, you need to be able to react quickly to whatever target comes along. As an armored car, the AMD.35 is wheeled, and we should talk briefly about wheeled vehicles in War Thunder in general. Wheels are obviously much lighter than tracks and need to overcome much less friction, both in the final drive and from the ground itself. This means that for the same weight and power, a wheeled vehicle will be much faster and more agile than a tracked vehicle on favorable surfaces, but they will have much less contact with the ground and therefore exert more pressure and have less traction. So, they struggle to climb hills and wade through mud and sand to a much greater degree. This is well modeled in War Thunder and needs to be taken into consideration. In particular for the AMD, the engine is a bit anemic as well, so many hills that are easily climbable in a tank are off limits. You can offset this somewhat by driving diagonally up the hill rather than straight on, but in general, if they're steep, they should be avoided. This shortcoming can be helped some by researching the tires upgrade immediately. After that, you want to move on to the brake system next. Without these upgrades, the car slides around like the finest Brittany butter. Trying to stop quickly to poke around a corner will result in you drifting into the middle of the street like a complete goon. Even with the upgrades, it's only so much of an improvement, so brake early. The armor is thin, no surprise there, around 15mm for the hull and turret. It's angled at the front in some places, and where it's flat it's marginally thicker, including the turret face at 26mm. All that combined means that it's nearly proof against 50 cal machine gun fire, at least from the front, but anything else will go right through. Finally, and most importantly, the AMD.35 is hindered by the issue that nearly all of the early French vehicles suffer from: a lack of decent ammo types. A solid shot AP round is all you get, and it's a big problem. This gun, the SA-35 L72, is an especially bad offender, as it's only 25mm. While its penetration is perfectly acceptable, 68mm at 100 meters, the damage is typically very underwhelming. Playing this vehicle is actually a lot of fun, but you need to stick to a particular style to get the most from it. Firstly, you need to stay with your team, as the gun is not nearly good enough to roam out on your own and make solo kills. Don't hang out amongst the main lemming train of your team though, this vehicle is definitely a flanker. Your primary job is to maim, not kill. Take out enemy drivers, engines, transmissions, and gunners. Once that's accomplished, move on to your next target. Don't linger on one vehicle. The key to the AMD.35 is to make a dozen assists, not 1 or 2 kills. Once there's a nice pile of stranded enemies more focused on your team than you can swoop in and chip isolated vehicles to death yourself. Once you're done with them, move to scuttle away back to the flank as quick as you can, making use of the high reverse speed to move off quickly and disengage if you start taking fire. When playing against the AMD.35, there's plenty you can do to keep it down. Side on, its armor is thin and flat. That being said, the commander sits in the back and is protected on the right side of the vehicle by the engine and some internal armor plates. The rest of the crew are more repeatable targets. There are 2 men in the turret, and the driver can be found by firing into the top half of the front wheel. Head on, the weakest section is the top part of the driver's compartment, as it's nearly flat. Hit it right in the seam with the lower plate and you'll get 2 at least. It's also a fairly tall vehicle with a distinct silhouette, so it can't hide in as many tricky spots as you'd expect. So, an armored car is armored car. What's the low tier rundown rating for the AMD.35? You can have some real banger games in this thing, especially on wide open or urban maps. Nonetheless, I can't shake the fact that many vehicles at 1.0 could just make a kill for most of the times you'll make an assist, and there will be plenty of games where the gun doesn't niche and you get hosed down for dead. On average, the good evens out the bad, so its rating's a B. The intro taster to the fast side of the French tech tree is finished. We'll be moving on to the appetizer of heavy tank play in the next video with the H39.